Psychologists of Reddit. Have you ever been genuinely scared by a patient before? What's your story? Master's level psychotherapist here. Was doing anger management with a young person, 19 or 20 years old, on probation for domestic assault. When we were talking about the situation and what happened, he said, "My girlfriend had a smart mouth, so I punched her in it." I was talking to his probation agent later about his cold demeanor, and he told me to watch him closely. Suggested, verbatim, that he could be the next Ted Bundy. This was a probation officer that usually didn't get involved with the treatment program unless his probationers were really high risk. His words had me spooked. Kid violated probation quickly and was sentenced to a few more years, which we all thought was fine by us. He was creepy. Once when I was a medical student, I was asked to see a patient in the psychiatric unit of the emergency room. I walked in with my short white coat and clipboard and asked the guy what brought him in today and what was wrong. He looked me dead in the eyes with foamy saliva dribbling from the corner of his mouth and a strange smell in the air and said, "The devil told me to kill you and then myself." He was sweaty and his eyes were bloodshot, and his wife beater had dark red/brown stains on it. The door was behind him and I wasn't sure I could make it there before something bad happened. No idea if he had a weapon on him. Was afraid of calling loudly for help. I was in a quiet corner of the ER and I felt like I would have had to yell to get attention, and I didn't want to startle him. I stayed there for a half hour and asked him more questions. Slipped out when he started to look sleepy. First thing I was taught when doing psych rounds, never let a patient get between you and the door. That's the first thing they told us when we did psych. I remember this one old psychiatrist whose face just didn't look right and had a weird hand. Apparently had a patient come in years ago who thought that God was telling him the psychiatrist was Satan. Took a meat cleaver to the guy and cut him up really bad. The psychiatrist couldn't get out of his office because the patient chair was between him and the desk. They ended up rearranging all the offices at the university clinic so the psychiatrist would always be sitting closer to the door and there was always a desk separating them from the patient. Not a psychiatrist or psychologist, RN on acute psych unit. I've had a few, but one that really stands out was a young and rather built fella. Perfect example of a sociopath, charming when he wanted something, zero capacity for empathy, lack of remorse, very manipulative. If you've seen the movie American Psycho, he nailed the role of Patrick Bateman. I won't give out too much information because I love my job and want to keep it, but anyhow. Just very cold, and I've never seen such an evil and malicious smile. Had that grin on his face seconds before assaulting a staff member. Sociopaths scare TF out of me because of how they can go from being super charismatic and charming to zero empathy, with the flip of a switch. Dated one when I was 17, he was 19, in college, and thank God I noped out of that one fairly quickly. It wasn't until my freshman year of college, taking Psych 101, that I even learned about the disorder. I'm happy to hear you got out of there. Very smart decision. They can put on a charming mask. Truly an evil in disguise. Worked in a mental health facility for children for 6 months. Saddest 6 months of my life. Top 3 shocking things that happened were: 1. Severely schizophrenic 16-year-old teenage boy who was around 5 feet tall, 90 pounds, would get put into a straitjacket during one of his episodes, and he could physically take down the 6 feet 3 inches 230 pounds male tech, while being in a straitjacket. He would speak in voices that almost sounded demonic while doing it. It was horrifying. 2. Severely schizophrenic 17-year-old girl would hide in a corner, wait till her targeted worker would walk by, stick her hands down the front of her pants into her vagina, grab a handful of period blood, and smack us across the face with the blood. She did this to me more than once, and I had to go to the hospital more than once, during work hours, to get tested, especially when the blood would get close to our mouths and eyes. I'm not a psychologist, yet, but a clinical behavior analyst in training. I work on a pediatric psych unit/school to get my clinical hours. My second day there, one of my patients lost it and started throwing cinnamon buns and shooting maple syrup at the staff. It took 6 cops and a taser to subdue her. A few people had unpredictable anger and outbursts that could be scary at times, and once a husband brought a gun to a couple's therapy session and threatened to kill himself/wife. Luckily we were able to calm the situation down, but things like that can end badly, and you always have to be aware of that possibility when emotions run high. Not a psychologist, but saw a breakdown in my ex that scared me senseless. He had just started meds and the meds reacted horribly with him for whatever reason. He mostly had hallucinations, but sometimes he'd black out and do activities and not remember them. He would call me screaming at 3 a.m. and he didn't remember a second of it. Any of it. He had hallucinations before, but they got increasingly dangerous with these meds. In particular, I think of one instance. While on the phone during an episode, he said, "I boiled some water." I asked why, as it was 3 a.m., and he replied eerily calmly, "They told me I have to stick my hand in here." It was absolutely terrifying. I finally begged him to go to the hospital that following morning to ask for a medication change, and he begrudgingly obliged. While he was there, he started throwing up blood and had to get his stomach pumped. Turns out, in one of his blackouts, he swallowed his entire bottle of medication. Clinical psychologist here. I used to work in a prison and did a parole evaluation for an inmate that was a high-ranking gang member in a national gang. By his account, he was the highest ranking in the state. In fact, he was placed in that prison to hold his people accountable and keep the peace. He had a long violent record and was, in my opinion, a genuine psychopath. Part of the evaluation is discussing the crime and assessing remorse and whatnot. He was so clinical in his description of how he tortured and left this guy to die over an unpaid debt. Live by the sword, die by the sword was his phraseology for the act. Like it was nothing. He was also very nonchalant about his ability to take care of his business while inside. I believed him. He had only spent 18 months of his last 15 years outside of prison. My recommendation was not to parole him. There were various factors that I gave, and in the end the parole board went with my recommendation. So the part that actually scared me, this was my first parole evaluation, was this guy's ability to affect the world outside. He could have sent someone to my house if he wanted to. I had no doubt about that. More experienced psychologists told me not to worry about it. That he knew the score and wouldn't take it personally. I had a hard time buying it. I was running a long-term offender group a few months later and he was part of it. After the first group, I pulled him aside and asked if we were good. He smiled at me and told me not to worry. I did my job and he didn't blame me for writing what I did because it was true. He went on to be a really insightful and active group member. Criminal defense lawyer here. A lot of those guys basically understand that we exist in the system, but that we're in a different world than they are. So, they might kill a guy for shorting them on cash because he's part of their world, but not be upset at the prosecutor who sends him to jail for a decade because the prosecutor isn't. It's an interesting disconnect. A very sweet, mostly blind teenager who was going through his first psychotic break and had a love of martial arts, Taekwondo, if I remember correctly, was really good at it. He couldn't see and would practice kicks, and at one point, accidentally kicked one of the reinforced shatterproof windows in the quiet room. Think padded room without the padding. Turns out they were shatter resistant. He destroyed it with that kick. Why those particular details? Because he would practice his kicks everywhere, was mostly blind, and the one time he flipped up to practice one and I was walking around the corner, it came literal centimeters from my face, and I felt the impact of it against the air, like a physical force bashing into my face. Sweetest kid in the world, he would have been horrified if it had connected, because things would have broken. A lot of things. He also grabbed my arm once in a suddenly firm grasp and asked if I wanted to do Taekwondo with him. No, I did not. Not a psychologist, but I'm a sped teacher. I used to work in a self-contained room for behavioral disorders, high school. I have several, but I feel like I wouldn't want to share the actual emotional ones out of respect for those students. Behaviorally, though, wowza. One of the craziest ones was the young man that I knew was a psychopath. His father was in jail for molesting the younger sister. He lived with his mother. She was a really nice lady and cared a great deal about how he did in school. Right before the father was to be released from jail, he tried to convince the kid to burn down the house in an attempt to kill the mom. He did try. He did manage to destroy their home, but he failed to kill the mom and he ran away. I was able to tip off the police as to where he ran off to. A couple of months later, when the father was released from prison, he showed up to where the mom was staying and stabbed the mom to death, and back to prison he went. I had no idea what happened to the kid for years, but would look him up on the inmate search from time to time, until one day I had a hit. He was in jail for raping a young girl and was in jail as well. He has since been rehabilitated and released and is now living out in the world amongst us. I have no idea where. Rehabilitated? Yep. According to the state of Illinois penal system. All fixed up and ready to roll. I pray that he takes no other victims. Seriously. I'm a psychologist now, but, between undergraduate and graduate school, I worked at this facility with male teenage offenders for about 2 years. It was the single worst period of my entire life. When I started, I generally had faith in the staff, and I really wanted to help the kids. It probably wasn't 6 weeks in before all of the stress got to me. The kids knew that most of the rules were not enforceable, and they could constantly curse at us, threaten us, steal, break rules, manipulate the system, and act out with very few repercussions. I think it was my second day there when I saw a kid break down a steel door with a chair. They would provoke staff. They would provoke each other so they could force staff to intervene and try to get the staff in harm's way. What's worse, I'm a bit of a straightforward and by-the-book guy, and the kids started to learn that I would enforce the rules, and they started to hate me and target me. I began to have chest pain on the drive to work. I would have trouble falling asleep at night because I would be imagining the threats and restraints the next day that I might be involved in. It does bad things to your psyche when someone can criticize you, make false allegations against you just to get you in trouble, lie to you, demean you, and threaten you for months on end, and you essentially can't defend yourself because you're constrained by your role. You can't hit them back, talk back, show attitude, and the only tiles you can enforce or privileges you can take away, the kids could give a shit about. Meanwhile, you are giving them your everything. Basic hygiene, school help, counseling, playing games, talking them through life issues, putting them to bed at night. You're essentially their parent. But to answer your questions, yeah, I was afraid of several of them. I was assaulted 3 times while I worked there. 2 of the assaults were relatively minor, just a single punch to the chest or a single punch to the face, but one of the kids punched me 6 or 7 times in the head. One of the kids who was HIV positive, anytime he would be mad or get in trouble, he would guilt us that he was going to die of AIDS one day, and then he would threaten to cut himself and then get his blood on us. We had lots of gang members too. They were all highly volatile. I worked at a youth shelter for 6 months as part of my psychology internship. It shattered all my desire and drive to work with teens and young adults. I hated it. You perfectly voiced how I felt. Didn't matter what they did, you could not retaliate or respond. I'm looking for work now and the shelter's hiring, but I'd rather work at a fast food restaurant. At least there I can call the cops if someone decides to take a swing at me. Thank you for saying that. It is honestly super validating to hear. I've always felt a sense of embarrassment and shame that I didn't handle it better, as it seems so many other people were. But I totally share your sentiment. I would rather go dig ditches for a living or move back in with my parents than go back to a job like the psych hospital. I made a vow to myself never to put myself in that situation again. My current job sometimes asks that we go do psych evaluations in a jail setting, and it is literally the only function of the job that I openly refuse to do. Luckily, they have been understanding of that. Props to you for taking care of yourself. Had a client years ago who had recently gotten out of prison for assaulting a police officer pretty badly. The client had a volatile temper and lived in a violent family growing up. The client never got angry with me, personally. However, while talking about their family and other people in their life, the client would get so worked up with anger that I sometimes wondered if I was safe. I started pretending to be on emergency call duty in the clinic where I worked so that I had an excuse to carry a walkie-talkie with me during our sessions. Shortly after I began doing that, I terminated the therapeutic relationship and referred the client for a completely different type of treatment than what I provided. The last I heard, the new treatment method was helping the client. Therapist in training and my tutor, who is a childhood abuse and trauma specialist, tells some horror stories. The one that stood out for this question was a guy in his mid-40s who had lived most of his life with extreme paranoia that his parents were sending people to get information from him to blackmail him with. This guy was extremely unstable and was legally obligated to go to therapy after committing some petty theft because he believed his parents were tracking his money. Anyway, he'd been going for about 6 weeks and he began to talk about a plan for the future. He was kind of vague but said he had worked out a way to break free from his childhood and move forward. My tutor was apprehensive but hopeful. He had been making good progress in the previous sessions. Fast forward a week and this guy is back again. He's noticeably agitated and carrying a large sports bag. My tutor remarks that she's pleased to see him and likes his new bag. He breaks down. He confesses that he has a machete in the bag and had planned to kill everyone from his old life, starting with his therapist, so he could be free from his past, but she was very nice and would be hard to kill. My tutor politely excused herself and called the police. The guy was very compliant. He'd pretty much given up at that point, but the police confirmed he did indeed have a large machete in his bag and his car was full of bin bags. She said that was the only time she felt she was close to dying and says the moral of the story is to treat all your clients well because you never know who's plotting your murder. That last part is just good life advice, not just regarding clients, but people in general. I'm a therapist, but not a psychologist if that matters. I used to work in a facility for kids and adolescents with pretty intense behavioral issues. Even when a client was aggressive, I was usually able to de-escalate them and I generally didn't feel unsafe. In fact, most of the time I was concerned about their safety during outbursts. With one exception, I had a client that was pretty strong and prone to intense tantruming. This client was acting in a way that was unsafe, had a plan to seriously hurt another resident, I think. So I had to put them on restriction, within staff eyesight at all times. Their response was to run up to me and attempt to choke me. Luckily the staff got there in time and prevented this kid from seriously hurting me. On another occasion, this same client also took apart their curtain rod in their bedroom and swung it at my head. I dodged in time. Oddly enough, this client and I had a pretty good relationship the other 99% of the time, and I generally enjoyed working with them. I'm a teacher, and my scariest/most violent student was also genuinely charming and personable at times. Odd for sure. What I noticed during my 7 years of being a junkie is that I could be the sweetest, kindest, most charming friend in the world. And when you're that person, things generally go your way because people want it to go smooth. Why wouldn't they? I brought them joy and friendship and love. So I became conditioned for things always going my way. But as soon as I needed something that was out of the box, or things started to go not my way, I was a putrid evil ass. And when you're a sweetheart bunny rabbit 99% of the time, the other person can't hardly believe it happening and think maybe they're misreading or misunderstanding what's actually happened. Humans are effed up. Glad I'm off that shit. Thanks for being a teacher. I work at a psych hospital. Your first experience with a patient attempting to seriously injure or kill you is always frightening, but most of the time, at least at my workplace, it's more heartbreaking than scary. I was a receptionist at an adolescent psychiatric hospital, and the dad of one of our kids brought in all the weapons he had and all the drugs he found. He just wanted to show the doctor, but he had to be escorted out. And then the kid attacked his mom. Not a psychologist, but I was held in a behavioral center for attempting to take my own life when I was newly 13, and one of patients in with me had to wear a helmet because he would smash his head into the wall. When the nurses would come restrain him, he would scream that kind of scream that's so painful to hear it just makes you want to curl in a corner and cry. He also apparently had a history of SA and was the reason none of the patients were allowed to sit with their legs open. He terrified me. Wow, I'm sorry you had to go trough this. Being held for one's own safety is often not safe at all. I hope you are in a better place now. I am, thank you. I think psychologists tend to be more scared for their patients than by them. Especially in the US, there's a lot of situations in which psychologists cannot help because the problems their patients are facing involve justified and realistic fears. Here's a link to a screenshot of a relevant post. They also can't help because the person can't afford their rates and, well, what can you do? Where I live there's a few free walk-in clinics where therapists and some psychology students volunteer to help out when they can. Problem is there's so many people in poverty that can't afford help normally that the walk-ins end up kinda backlogged, and some people can't wait in line for that long since they have to work so many hours. Good friend of mine's wife is a psychologist at a well-known prison and sees some seriously fucked up people for a living. Let's just say, Hannibal inspired her to do what she does for a living, and she's as close to Clarice as a person can probably get in real life. She is usually briefed on relevant details before she is assigned to a case. This includes court proceedings, testimonies, etc. She's heard recordings of murders and other such disturbing shit. She's tough as nails, and I guess she loves psychoanalyzing scary psychos. She had to be taken off a case because she was so uneasy, disturbed, and threatened by one of her clients. Apparently this guy was either a serial rapist or murderer. She couldn't give lots of details, but he has a victim profile and she fit it. He started to behave strangely towards her, trying to converse with her and get to know her. He would write her letters and draw her pictures, and attempt to give her tokens and things. All the things he would do to his victims, well, everything possible under the circumstances. She was so upset and disturbed by his special attention that she was even afraid at the grocery store and started to feel uneasy in her home at night. Despite the fact that this guy was locked up in a maximum security prison. She described it like a hunter/prey vibe on a really weird animalistic level. She was taken off his case and received counseling. When she told me about it, she was very honest and matter of fact. This is a hazard of the job she works. While she may talk about her patients as if they are lab rats, this was one case you could tell really got under her skin and spooked her. Edit. Obviously giving tokens and letters is not only creepy but violates the doctor-patient relationship. She would decline very firmly and clearly, and I guess maybe some stuff was intercepted before he had the chance to try and actually give it to her? It's been about 10 years since I heard the story, but it stuck with me. I work with special needs populations, all of whom come to us via referral, so when I have someone whose mother starts off by saying the school is misunderstanding her teenager, I know I'm in for something more interesting. This kid was 16. He was obsessed with several people who had been nice to him at various times. He considered them his best friends and had an entire inner world of how ride and die they were for each other. In the major case, he hadn't spoken to the other boy in 2 years since they had stopped doing scouting together. Patient had heard a school rumor that his best friend's girlfriend had cheated on him with another kid and proceeded to pour kerosene on the girl's car while she was in it and try to set it on fire. I'm a farm worker. The grandson of the guy I worked for was off the charts crazy. The grandparents couldn't control him. They bought him a .22 rifle. It had a trigger lock. They gave him the key and some ammunition. I locked it away because he was 6 years old. He threatened to shoot me, so I put him in timeout. He shit on the floor and laughed like a crazy asshole. I came to find out it was his sister's rifle I took away, because a few hours later he came outside with his rifle trigger lock-off bolt in and ammunition in his pocket to kill me for taking away his sister's gun. Every day I had to deal with something like this. I have seen other workers chasing this 6-year-old kid with hammers. He was batshit crazy. I have many stories about that year. I warned him to stop playing on the roof of a tractor. He would get hurt and I am not there to watch that BS. He starts to get down and just seemed to flop down on purpose, landed stomach first on the back of the tractor. It would have hurt so bad. He cried for about 20 seconds, then cackled with laughter. He probably broke ribs and I saw massive bruises on his stomach when he lifted his shirt to check for cuts. I watched him kill baby chickens by first saying how cute and petting them, then standing on them. He tortured the farm dog to the point it growled when he went near, and one point I actually had to stop the dog from killing him. It had him by the back of the neck and was chomping down. He was crying, then burst into laughter. I can't speak enough about this kid to convey the frustration he would cause. He scared me, and I was on a farm where aggressive black Angus bulls were a daily thing. Everyone hated that kid, and I am relieved I'm not around him anymore. Hess coming your way, psychologists. My wife and I worked as house parents for a dozen or so girls between the ages of 5 to 18, all of whom had varying degrees of mental illness. Had a 6-year-old who had brutally essayed other little children at knife point. When she was with us, she was a bright, funny, sweet little child. Honestly, we had girls who had a history of animal abuse/murder, arson, violence, etc. But the ones who scared the absolute shit out of me were the manipulators. Now, all of them would manipulate, but not to this capacity. One girl had a history of accusing, with such incredible detail and story consistency, men of rape/molestation, that she utterly ruined lives and broke up families with her convincing lies. As a male, rule of thumb is never be alone in a room with any one girl. With this girl, I couldn't even be in the same room without my wife also present and cameras consistently monitoring our interactions. Not an official psychologist, studying, but my cousin seriously worries me. He's becoming more and more manipulative and psychotic, and once threatened to shoot himself in the head if a classmate didn't give him back his game. My family can't do anything about it because my aunt and uncle are just as crazy. I feel bad for my other cousin because she's the only normal one there. Edit, my uncle has guns. He had a gun at his head when he made that threat. My family is mega fucked. I've worked with a variety of accused murderers, including one charged with, and very clearly guilty of, a triple premeditated homicide. Never really scared of them. Even though they were mentally ill, they were still fairly rational. Working with a short, brain-damaged female who assaulted me, security, and a psychiatrist regularly. Yes. I stopped working with her because she didn't just fight, she bit and spit. After an hour of lockdown, she would be calm and speak, only to escalate in minutes and assault another staff member. So have I been afraid? Yes, of the one most people wouldn't think is actually dangerous. When I was studying psychology my final year, I had the opportunity to meet with convicted felons. Essentially, I sat down and spoke to a man, in his 30s-ish, who was a S-offender. He told me he used to marry women and then abuse their young daughters. Each was in the range of 6 to 7 years old. I listened to him explain it. It was literally my instructions not to judge them. I had to sign a waiver to not get emotional. So I asked him about the home life of those he abused. He'd say that some of the women he married had other children, and in one case there was an older sister who was 13, but he would never ever touch her. He'd drop her off at school, where he told me he was never into any of the children he saw, and take her to practice in friend's house, and while she was gone, he'd go back and abuse her 6-year-old sister. He told me that it really isn't always about being attracted to prepubescent girls, it's about the dominance and power that come with mating with them. He's being rehabilitated now though. Weird part was that I wasn't sure if he was acting remorseful, because if he was, he is amazing at it. He was just very open to my questions and expressed regret, and I almost believed him. However, when I met a man who was convicted of CP, his, "I feel terrible," were transparent and so full of shit it was disgusting. My professors warned me about manipulation, so that was easy to catch on to, but with the previous guy? He was either an impeccable liar and manipulator, or he genuinely wanted to get better. Crazy. Not a psychologist, but my brother is. I will not for the life of me tell anyone this guy's name, and my brother told me about it because it kind of messed him up. My brother started his practice, ran from his house, in the same city where I went to college. He worked with this guy who was in my class. We were both econ majors, and I saw him around all the time. He seemed pretty white bread. Wore tees and jeans all the time, headphones in, quiet. Only thing that was weird was he carried a laptop bag/briefcase in addition to his backpack. He started seeing my brother about 2 months into freshman year. He came in for depression, and went through some basic stuff. He didn't feel like he fit in, he didn't know how to talk to people. My brother said this all felt very rehearsed to him. Like, he seemed to be rattling it off from memory. After a few sessions, things changed. The guy says he sees things. He said he can't stand being alone in dark rooms. His roommate moved out of his dorm, so it made it worse. He said he sees things move when he's in the dark. Small, almost imperceptible movements in the corner of his eye. He says he is scared all the time at night. This worried my brother, because before then, it was just depression. Paranoia wasn't a good sign, and he started to think this guy was schizophrenic. The movements apparently got worse. Around late November, this guy started calling my brother's work phone, which happened to be a cell that my brother kept on him. At night, 2 a.m., almost like clockwork, this guy would call. Because my brother was afraid this guy's state might deteriorate, he answered the first ones. He said it was awful. His voice was strained. This guy was barely whispering into the phone. He could hear the guy crying. It went on like this for days. Eventually it got to the point where my brother, at their next in-person meeting, told him he needed to take off second semester and seriously consider inpatient care, and that he needed to focus on other patients. He referred him to a health center, and another psychologist who was more experienced with serious cases. This guy cried in his office after being told that. He cried and apologized for over an hour, and he just kept saying, "I'm so fucking scared." I never saw this guy after holiday break. My brother has a few more meetings with him, and he agreed to an inpatient care center after a talk with his parents. 4 months later. It is April, my brother starts seeing lights outside his window at weird times. Not car lights, but like, flashlights. He figured it was just drunk college kids being insensitive. One night he hears knocking on his door, like quick slams, but he ignores it. That same night he gets a call, and he has since changed his policy for late night calls, and he ignores it. It's the guy. He is screaming into the phone, "They're back, they're back, they're back," and he says it faster and faster until he starts crying on speaker, and he says on the message, "I'm outside, please let me in, please." Before the message ends you can hear him slamming on my brother's front door. The guy didn't talk to my brother after that. He took his own life 3 months later, we found out. Why didn't he call the police when he was banging on the door? My brother lived in a strip of town between the downtown and the college. He had gotten a number of students and straight-up assholes who made tons of noise. He said he never heard the screams, though. Part of what made him so scared was he had no idea this kid was outside his door until the next day.